Hi, everyone. This is Professor Luce, and today we're going to talk about the persuasive speaking assignment. I am going to include a link to the PowerPoint at the end. It is in D12, but that way you can go back and access everything later on. There are videos included. We're not going to watch all the videos in this video, but that way you have access to them later on. So I do want to start with the persuasive speech assignment itself. I'm not going to read everything from the document, but I want to make sure that you have a clear overview. So you do have access to the speech assignment. And as you can see on this slide, um, this is the overview of the persuasive speech assignment. So your objective is to speak advocating for a policy change using either problem solution or problem cause solution. I do want to explain that. You all have experience with a policy. You may not realize it. Your speech has to be policy based. It is not just you persuading us that we should like your favorite team or that we should drink Coke whenever we want to. You are limited in terms of which topics you can choose, but you are able to choose a policy based speech. So you have policies that you're used to all the time. If you have a job, you have policies at work, right? I'm sure you have a dress code. That is a policy. It is just a way of saying a rule or a law. You cannot advocate for maintaining a rule or law. You have to advocate for a change. So there are other restrictions based on that, but that is the general overview of what you need to do. Advocate for a change in a rule or a law. So there are lots of things that you can choose, but I want to push you to do more advanced policy. So there is a no decade old topic policy in place, and then you also can't choose moral issues. It's not that I don't believe you can't make an argument about a moral issue, is that you're not going to change anyone's mind about a moral issue in 5 to 7 minutes. Think about it. Think about your morals. Would you change those based on just a 5 to 7 minute speech? No. Might you think about it? Sure, but you're not going to change your mind about it. So, with the decades old policy, I cannot give you an exhaustive list of everything that has been around for 10 years or more. But basically, if something has been discussed for at least 10 years, it's generally going to be a no for a topic. So, general things that you could think of changing the drinking age. That's been around since the 1980s, if not longer. Legalization of marijuana. That's been around since the 1960s, if not longer. Um, Removing seatbelt restrictions. That's been around since the 80s. Those are just three very quick topics that fall underneath the decades issue. With moral issues, or I'll say moral adjacent, those are things like abortion and death penalty, which I'm sure you could recognize as moral issues. But then also things like gun gun legislation. That's something people feel very strongly about one way or the other. So that's not something you're going to change someone's mind in 5 to 7 minutes. So any topic that falls underneath those two is not going to be allowed. Outside of that, you do have a lot of freedom. You can choose an international policy if you want. That's tougher, but you could do that. A national policy is very easy to find. Proposed legislation about federal issues, state level policies. That's also very easy to find a lot of research on about state level issues. And then local issues, which can work, but it can be more complicated. So I'm not going to say no. You just have to be able to find the evidence for it. With this speech, it is not you coming up with a solution. I have to be clear about that. You need to find evidence that says word for word what your solution is going to be. The way to approach this is not to come up with a solution in your head and then look for evidence that says that, because you're not going to do that. You're not a policymaker. I'm not a policymaker. In fact, people that pass policies often aren't policymakers. They rely on other people to write the legislation. What you can do is look up a key phrase in Google, propose legislation, and then insert your topic. So if you put propose legislation, solve homelessness, propose legislation, reduce drug addiction, propose legislation, prison reform, that will create a list of a lot of policies that have been proposed by Congress, the state legislature, etc., and never pass. Congress does this all the time. They create hundreds, if not thousands, of bills each year, and then most of them are not passed. You can use legislation that was proposed 5 years ago. That's fine as long as it's still relevant and it was never passed. So you have a lot of different options there for finding a solution. The key is you cannot come up with it on your own. When it comes to creating a topic, you shouldn't find the solution first, not last. Identifying a problem is easy, finding a solution is hard. Think about how often you hear people complaining about things without offering an actual solution. If you go on Facebook, you'll find millions of people doing it every single day. So find the solution first. That's the hard part. And then you can find evidence about the problem. You won't get a topic approved unless you know exactly what your solution is going to be. In addition to that, there's basically two different ways that you can find a solution. So we talked about one of them, which is proposed legislation. That means that someone somewhere proposed a solution, it was never actually passed. The second is called modeling. And what happens is some place enacts a law somewhere and it works. And then you argue, well, we should adopt it here. And what here means is going to depend on the level of scale that you're looking at. So if you're looking at a national policy, let's say healthcare, and you find out that Germany has a really cool healthcare model and you think it should be implemented in the US, that's called modeling. We'd be modeling the German system. On the state level, we do this all the time. So driver's training laws. It wasn't always the way it is now in South Carolina, where you can start driving and learning and getting your permit at the age of 15. Instead, we looked at other states, figured out what they were doing, and said, you know what? It seems like what they're doing is working. Let's pass that here in South Carolina. You can do that on a city or county-wide level as well. So other cities, counties, like school boards, they have passed legislation that says, hey, let's do year-round schooling. And then other counties or cities have adopted that policy. So that's called modeling. Those are your two approaches to finding a solution. In addition to that, there are some other restrictions. You know, the time limit, you need at least 6 credible sources. They always have to be verbally cited. Those sources have to be from within 5 years or newer. If you're not finding sources that are 5 years or newer, why are we talking about this topic? It means it's not relevant, it's not current. You can have additional sources beyond those initial 6 that are a little bit older. That's fine as long as they're still applicable, relevant, and credible. But you have to have at least 6 from within the past 5 years. Also, things that are new, you need to have an opposing argument in your speech, meaning you identify what people might say against your topic. Usually that has to do with the solution. And if you think about it, a majority of the time we don't pass legislation is money. It's not because we don't think it's a problem. It's because it would cost a lot of money to do it. And the question becomes, is spending that amount of money worth it? The other thing that's going to be somewhat new is that you have to include a presentational aid. As you can see, what I'm doing right now, recording via Teams, easy enough to do. You can do it within Bongo as well. So you have a lot of different options there, but you can present a visual aid. And then the last thing that's going to be new is a question and answer session at the end of your speech. This question and answer period does not count toward your time. So your time of 5 to 7 minutes should be your speech with only you talking. And then that's when time will stop. Continue the recording, and then you need to have at least 2 thoughtful questions. I will be posting a news announcement later on as to what types of questions your audience should be asking, but they have to be in depth. Basically, they shouldn't be, why'd you pick this topic? Or do you think your solution is a good idea? Because of course you're going to say, I picked the topic because I care about it. Instead, they should be thoughtful questions like, how would we pay for this? Or you're taking money away from this other resource. Like, explain how this functions and why it's going to be worth it and why most people would choose to go with your solution. Okay, there are some other things here under, we talked about topic generation, topics that don't work. Also, as identified before in the informative speech, you know that there's a list of topics that have been generated before under content V2L. So make sure that if you are not sure of what a topic looks like, you look for those topics, and those can be samples. You can actually propose those if you wish. You do have to make sure on your own that those topics are still valid. Laws pass all the time. I am not going through that topic list every single month to see if those topics are still legitimate or not. So it's on you to make sure that those laws have not yet been passed. And then there's the assignment sheet. All right, so let's go ahead and go back up to the beginning. So in thinking about the informative speech, you should reflect upon what went well and what could be improved, and then make those changes before the persuasive speech. So often delivery is an issue, source citation is an issue, making sure I think that you all did a good job when it comes to introductions and conclusions, made significant improvements there. But of course, this speech gets tougher. And one thing that everybody notes is that you could have spent more time practicing. So with this persuasive speech, it gets more complicated, not less complicated, meaning you're going to spend more time practicing the speech. And I think as everyone learned from the last speech, getting your topic approved goes a long way in making sure you have enough time to practice. So get your topic approved early. We've talked about ethos, pathos, logos before. So these are all needed in the persuasive speech. You have logos, rational argument. You have pathos, emotional argument. So those are evidence arguments based on reasoning, statistics, etc. in terms of logos. And in terms of an emotional argument, often that's used with your visual aid. So if you're arguing for a change in homelessness, that you want to reduce the homeless population, often visual aids can go a long way in appealing to one's emotions. And then, of course, arguments for credibility comes through the research that you provide using credible sources. This video you'll have to watch on your own, but it's a really good example of some appeals that this person is using, especially emotional appeals, and also errors in reasoning or fallacies. This speech you should watch as well. I know it's a commercial, but think about what sort of appeals they are using, especially emotional appeals. Again, here there is some evidence, but think about what sort of errors in reasoning occur in this video. There's also fallacies in this video. If you've never seen this, in DirecTV commercial, and it talks about how one string of events happens right after the other, and it leads to a conclusion that should not be it's not part of a logical series of events. And again, another false dilemma, error in reasoning. And I can't cover all the fallacies, but there are some videos there. And then, of course, we have the sample speeches this week as well. So if you're looking for different videos, there's both the A level and the F level, and that does give you a policy-based speech. All right, that's all I have for today. I know this is a little bit longer video than what we typically have. Thank you all very much. And if you have questions, by all means, you're more than welcome to email me. And then if needed, we can set up a Teams meeting or a phone call.